For Creamer Media's Polity, Tabi Madiba, freelance writer and investigator Karl Kemp, joins me to discuss his book titled Promised Land, Exploring South Africa's Land Conflict. You traveled the country documenting the fallout of failing land reform. Can you briefly tell us what is the land question about to the people, both black and white?
I don't think there's any way to do that briefly. I mean, if I could, I'd have written a book at least 5 times as long as the one that eventually appeared. The land question is about so many things. It's become a beast on its own, that every facet of South African politics, our society, it seems to somehow be interwoven with land, because land appears to be, for many people, the root of all inequality in the country. And many other people dispute that, but because of EWC entering the public discourse, it now has become an almost a given. You can't escape it, really. So I'm sorry, I can't answer your question briefly. It really is a discussion on its own.
Why is the land issue so important now, more than 20 years ago?
I'm not sure. I don't actually think it is more important. That's kind of one of the conclusions I make in the book. I think it's become more heated, the debate surrounding it, but whether land reform is as necessary as it was 20 years ago, well, perhaps it's equally necessary, but the way we talk about it makes it seem like it's become more important now. We know that poverty and unemployment has continued to increase after the advent of the ANC in 1994. Whether the unequal distribution of land has increased, that's up for debate. Despite the many states' initiatives and private initiatives as well, it seems that we haven't really made a dent in the racialized patterns of ownership. But yeah, again, to come back to your question, I'm not sure it's that important. And many people might disagree with me, but perhaps it would be better to phrase it as simply eliminating poverty is incredibly important. And the land reform programs can play a role in that, but we should be careful not to conflate the two issues.
What were some of the issues you discovered when traveling the country?
Well, I think first and foremost is corruption. The absolutely blatant is the word I would use, corruption in many aspects and facets of the land reform programs. From when it comes to land restitution, you'll have this phenomena of brokers who force people who don't actually have a valid land restitution claim to court. And that takes up a lot of taxpayer money, takes up a lot of time, and often results in infighting, and the brokers leave with money in their pockets. That's just one example. Then you have the very famous examples like the Malamala game reserve scandal that falls under the redistribution aspect of land reform, where the state essentially has these vast tracts of land and uses taxpayer money to buy them. But the criteria for who is selected to receive that land is very vague. And it means that it's a very fertile ground for nepotism and corruption. So that, I think, is the first and foremost issue. I think that the plans as they were set in place in 97 with 3 aspects of land reform, those were decent plans, but the execution was an absolute farcical failure up until this point. And the government's response seems to have been to add more government schemes, more policy, and none of it is working. It's just created a bit of a mess. So that would be the number one issue, is corruption. And I think a lot of people seem to assume that racism and race politics plays a bigger role than it actually does. But yeah, that's a whole other discussion in and of itself. But yeah, to answer your question, I think corruption and that something that goes hand in hand with that is poor execution, poor service delivery. Really, the entire program has been hamstrung.
And the process of attempting a more equal distribution of land has assumed 3 phases in South Africa, namely restitution, distribution, and tenure security. Please explain to us how this process works.
Yeah, well, it's like you said, there's these 3 pillars, and they all flow from a certain piece of legislation. Land reform, so divided up into these 3. Restitution is citizen-led, where you'd have somebody who was dispossessed of land who can come forward and make a claim, whether that's a person or a community. And then there are certain criteria that attaches to that. You have to have been dispossessed due to a racist or discriminatory practice. There's a time limit, of course. You cannot claim for dispossession that took place before 1913, and a few other things. And basically, yeah, then you submit that claim. It has to be processed by the relevant authorities, and they decide on the validity of the claim, whether all those criteria I just mentioned are present. And if that happens, then they approach the current landowner and try to make something work out. If the validity of the claim is disputed by the landowner, then it might go to the land claims court. And yeah, so that's one aspect. The other aspect is redistribution of land, which basically is just where the state, as opposed to a citizen, takes a more active role in attempting to identify, purchase, and then redistribute any kind of land to persons who were previously disadvantaged. And then the third, of course, is tenure security, which is actually the most fascinating and I think the least talked about part of land reform, which essentially, because you have so many people that have had a home for generations, perhaps on a farm, or it also includes former homelands and the like. And they might have this home, and to all intents and purposes, it's theirs. But because of past legislation, they'd never obtained full title to this property. And that's a bit of an oversimplification, but I think you get the meaning. And I think estimates range from 50 to 60% of Black people in South Africa live in some kind of situation like this. So tenure security and tenure upgrade is the attempt by the state through legislation to secure those rights for these people who live without formal title, or maybe a weaker kind of title, that they have full ownership, or at the very least, that they are protected from arbitrary dispossession by, for example, a farmer who owns the farm, or a tribal chief who decides that they want to do something else with that land. So it's basically strengthening people's rights to the property they already have. So that's in a nutshell, and believe me, this is a very complex topic that I myself am definitely not an expert in. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's the three phases of land reform.
And how has land reform policy changed over the years?
Yeah, that's another very long question with a lot of answers. But yeah, again, in a nutshell, there's been several policy changes on a governmental level since the first white paper was introduced in '97. I think land reform started with what they called the SLAGs, the SLAGs. That was when land reform was still kind of had a very fixed, determined purpose, which was to help previously disadvantaged persons enter into the agricultural space. Because a lot of people who live in rural areas are dependent on subsistence farming, and trying to empower them by giving them land to be able to perhaps branch out into a proper kind of profit-making venture. That was the more targeted aim. And again, I speak under correction here, I'm no expert, but so that was the kind of initial thing, and it's developed over the years until what we have now, which is the cornerstone of government policy plus, so the proactive land acquisition strategy. And this strategy has the unfortunate kind of main feature of the state leasing out the land in its possession rather than transferring ownership to the person who receives the land. And I mean, you just have to look in the news to see why that would be an issue. Persons who lease land from the state don't farm it in the same way as somebody owns land. It's obviously also because the plus policy requires huge capitalization and a lot of money because land is so expensive. It's there to be looted and it's there to be stolen. And again, like I mentioned earlier, it's very difficult to have transparency in who is allocated land and how that money is spent and which land is bought. So yeah, I think to sum it up, and again, it's a large, long discussion, but to sum it up, we went from a very fixed kind of three phases purpose to what we have now, which is very broad and all-encompassing. If you look at the new expropriation bill that was gazetted, for example, you can see how kind of vague the terminology is and how it now relates also to housing and not just agricultural land anymore. And also kind of shifting around capital rather than from the bottom up empowering persons. So yeah, again, long discussion. I'm by no means an expert, but that is it in a nutshell.
And earlier on, you said corruption was the main issue for land reform. So can you talk to us about the opportunities for land reform corruption and how they affected the process of land reform?
Yeah, well, I think a good example I gave earlier was about the brokers in land restitution claims that perhaps irresponsibly encourage persons to lodge claims that might not be totally valid. Another example I give in the book is when people form communities for purposes of lodging a land reform claim. This was a scheme that Senzo Meyiwe pointed out in 2015. I think I also mentioned in the book, where people would use the names of persons who are deceased or identities that have been falsified to fill lists to make up a community-based claim when in fact there is no such community. And then when that claim is processed, because the systems are so poor, it gets processed, it gets gazetted, the money gets paid out, and the persons who made up those communities just disappear with the money. So that was mostly in KwaZulu-Natal, if I remember correctly. So that's one example, of course. The other is, like I just mentioned, with the plus policy, where there's a lot of state money to be spent, then always there will be vultures who find some way of channeling that money into their friends' pockets, or perhaps selecting some kind of holding company that then enters into a Black Economic Empowerment Program partnership with the persons who receive the land, and the money flows through there. So yeah, I think it's like I said, in terms of wherever there's state money that's available, people are going to come after it. And the various schemes and tricks that are devised in order to siphon that money off can be staggering.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell us, what does the land question mean to you as an individual?
To me as an individual, it means frustration. You know, I've tried very hard not to be prescriptive in anything in this book. I don't want to explain to people how they should think. And again, I'm not an expert on land by any means, but really what I tried to do was go out and tell stories and make sense of it for myself. The land question, it's so difficult to give it precise content now. For me personally, I mean, my family owns a farm. And I love that farm. And I understand, I think through owning that farm and working that land, I get a sense of why certain groups might feel that it's important to have land, and that it's not just about economic equality, and that there's a certain kind of sacred aspect to owning land that often white people might not see. But at the same time, I think this conception that all white people own a piece of land and that they are hoarding it is also a big misconception. You know? So it depends on what view you take. If you think of land as economic opportunity and economic equality, then that's one thing. That's a general debate we should all be having and thinking about. If you conceive of it as a very specific idea of physically the land, the soil that we're working with, that I don't have an answer for you on that one. That's very, I still need to figure that out for myself, even after taking almost 2 years out of my life to write and research this book. I'm still not sure. I left Cape Town on the trip with a lot of questions, and I answered some of them, but for every question I answered, another 3 arose. I think that, undertaking and answering your question properly would probably be a lifetime endeavor.
Mm-hmm. And farm matters is another topic in your book. So what is the link between farm matters and land reform?
Well, I suppose the question is there a link at all? Certainly, many people in the media and politicians make out that there is a link, and perhaps that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I think farm matters are, I understand 100%, being Afrikaans and having a lot of friends in the farming community, why it upsets people and why it makes them feel so strongly about it. And I think a lot of the more extremist almost elements have been washed out recently by the fact that people have become very moderate in their views about it. You see also groups like AfriForum who now also extend that kind of protection and support to non-white farmers, and it's become much less of a racial thing and more about rural safety. So yeah, the link is maybe self-created because the belief is that farm murders are committed in order to intimidate whites off the stolen land. And to be honest, there's a section in my book that does look at this where, you know, there was a time and a place, especially in the early 90s, where groups like APLA under the PAC most certainly did commit these crimes in order to intimidate whites. Whether that's still the case is up for debate. I don't believe so. Most of the victims I spoke to, it's definitely more about robbery than anything. But then you look again at the Brendan Horner case now that caused all the ructions in Senekal. The fact that Horner's body was found tied to a fence and that he'd been attacked quite brutally, I think that was clearly an attempt at intimidation. But from what I understand, it seemed to be the work of a stock thieving syndicate. And we know for a fact that on that border with Lesotho, there's an incredible conflict raging between private security, the farmers, and persons from Lesotho who are extremely economically deprived due to the Chinese influence in the mohair trade. So again, is that about land? I'm not sure. Is it more than ordinary crime? Most certainly, because there's so much else swirling around it. It's, again, such a such a big topic. I wish we could speak longer about it. But in brief, I think there's a link between farm murders and land reform because that's what people believe it to be, and that's what they expect from the history of South Africa. But to be quite honest, I think these days it's largely about crime. I think people, both white and black, tend to expect too much drama and too much emotion from things that are actually just about resources at the end of the day.
And lastly, how do you think the demand for land expropriation without compensation will play out in the South African land debate?
Well, the expropriation bill has been gazetted, so we're on track. I think the parliamentary committee that's looking at amending the property clause in the Constitution will probably also finish its mandate at some point, which means that it will be more difficult to mount a legal challenge to the application of the expropriation bill. How it will play out, I can't be sure. I really can't. I can't see it being used efficiently. I can't see, even if I don't agree with EWC as from a moral standpoint, but even if it were to be applied, I don't see it being applied effectively, purely because, again, it's working within the same paradigm we've been working the whole time. Nothing's really changed. The state still takes an active role. The state still has a lot of money to play with, and this would just give it more of an opportunity, a bigger hammer to attack with. So no, I can't see it working out, not unless there's a radical structural change and in the moral culture of the ANC or the ruling party as a whole. But like I said, from the get-go, I don't care which party is in control of the country. EWC and the erosion of property rights is a bad idea, and I can't see it playing out in any other way than a nightmare.
That was Karl Kemp speaking to Pubmed Media's Polity about promised land, exploring South Africa's land conflict.